All right, let's see who we've got on the docket today. Hitler, Stalin, Chamberlain, and Mao. Fun. Welcome to the Celestial Fact Check program. My name's Oliver, and I'm your auditor. Looks like management wants to verify if your most famous claims were actually true, or just, manipulative tactics. Let's get started. So, have you ever wondered about that? What if some of history's most infamous figures had to sit down and have their biggest speeches put under a microscope? Well, that's what we're doing. I'm sure nobody here has anything to hide, right? The process is pretty routine. We take a look at a speech you gave, and I just check the claims against the historical record. Think of it as just a bit of celestial paperwork to set things straight. Let's see who passes the audit.
Okay, here are the case files for today's review. We're going to kick things off with Hitler's claims about starting the war, then we'll move on to Stalin's so-called constitution, Chamberlain's big compromise, and we'll wrap up with Mao's great leap forward before we get to the final verdict.
All right, first step. Welcome. Adolf, have a seat. We're diving into your 1940 speech to the Reichstag. This is the one where you were celebrating the victory over France and offered what you called a final appeal to reason. That's a bold claim. Let's look at the specifics. So let me get this straight. The key point you're making is that Germany was the real victim here, right? That this huge war was forced upon you, and all you were trying to do was peacefully fix an unfair treaty, a revision by peaceful means. Let's check the receipts on that one, shall we?
This timeline here seems to tell a very different story. One that kind of blows up your whole claim. You violated the Versailles Treaty by rearming in 35, illegally sent troops into the Rhineland in 36, annexed Austria in 38, and then took all of Czechoslovakia in 39. And this was all before the invasion of Poland. None of this is really screaming peaceful to me.
And here we have it, the official excuse. This was your public reason for invading Poland. You claimed they attacked you first. You needed a justification, and I guess when Poland didn't give you one, you just decided to manufacture it yourself. And here's the truth behind that claim. It's called the Gleiwitz Incident, a classic false flag operation. Your own SS troops, dressed up as Polish soldiers, faked an attack on a German radio station just to create a phony reason for war. Germany wasn't showing self-defense. You were exerting total control to start a war you always wanted. It's the red door for you, Adolf. Next. All right, bring the next one in. Mr. Stalin, take a seat. For your review, we've pulled up the speech you gave in 1936 when your famous Stalin Constitution was passed. You called it the most democratic constitution on earth, which is an interesting choice of words, considering you kicked off the Great Purge the very next year. Let's just start with this little gem right here. Freedom of speech and of the press is fully secured. Wow, okay, that is a heck of a claim. Let's see how that one stacks up against what was actually happening back in the Soviet Union. And yeah, this slide tells a very, very different story. See, the Soviet idea of freedom was that you could say whatever you wanted once. Every single newspaper, every radio station was state-controlled. If you criticized the party, you didn't get a bad review, you got a bullet in the neck. Hundreds of writers executed, churches shuttered. They even had parasite laws that made being unemployed a crime. And the Gulag system? It just turned millions of people into state-owned slave laborers. And this is what your freedom looked like in practice. Between 1937 and 38, your secret police unleashed the Great Terror. They were given literal quotas for how many people to execute in each region. It was like a grocery list for genocide. Official records show almost 700,000 people were executed in those 2 years alone. That's about 1,000 people shot every single day. Red door, please, now. So that brings us to a really important question, doesn't it? How does someone sell a lie on this kind of scale? I mean, how do you promise freedom to the world while you're actively planning a massacre? It's something to think about as we move to our next case file. Next up, Mr. Chamberlain. Now, your case is a little different. You weren't a genocidal dictator, but you're here because, well, it could be argued your actions enabled one. So the question for the record is, were you a collaborator or just dangerously naive? So this was you, fresh off the plane from Munich, waving a piece of paper in the air, triumphantly declaring you had secured peace for our time. And this settlement you were so proud of? It was the Munich Agreement, where you and some other leaders basically decided to just hand over a big piece of Czechoslovakia to Hitler.
Your belief was that Hitler was a man of his word, that you had averted a war. The reality? You handed him Czechoslovakia's main fortifications on a silver platter. He took the rest of the country just 6 months later and then started World War II within a year. You said he could be relied upon. I know hindsight is 20/20, Neville, but that was a truly catastrophic misjudgment. And it seems management agrees. It's the red door for you, too.
All right, final case of the day, Mao Zedong. In 1958, you launched the Great Leap Forward, and the idea on paper was simple. You were going to turn China from a country of farmers into an industrial powerhouse, basically overnight.
And this was the central slogan, right? Everything was about steel production. You looked at the West and said, why can't we just leap forward instead of crawling? But the entire plan, the whole thing, was built on pure ideological passion and peasant labor, not on actual engineering or logistics. It was a strategy made of slogans and fear.
And this ideology led directly to a full-blown disaster. People were ordered to melt down their farm tools, even their cooking pots, in these little backyard furnaces, which just created tons of useless metal. Officials were so terrified of you that they just faked the production numbers, and that lie became national policy. Meanwhile, these people's communes seized all the food, and the government took grain based on harvest that never actually happened. And if you spoke out about any of it, you were beaten to death.
And this single number, this is the result. An estimated 45 million people starved to death. To put that into perspective, that is more people than died in all of World War I. A famine caused not by a drought, but by a policy. Yeah. I think you know where the red door is.
So after reviewing all these cases, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. You see these common threads, a kind of playbook of manipulative techniques that gets used time and time again.
Let's break it down into 4 simple steps. First, you fabricate a crisis. You make up a false threat. Second, you claim you're the victim. Third, you promise everybody a perfect future, a utopia, if they just give you absolute power. And finally, and this is the most important step, you silence anyone who dares to point out that it's all a lie.
So that's the playbook. Fabricate a crisis, claim victimhood, promise a utopia, and silence dissent. The final question on the docket today is actually for you. Which of these tactics do you see being used out there in the world today? Something to think about. My shift's over, I'm clocking out.